Harry Williams was a 75-year-old veteran, and today he sat quietly at a small corner table in a bustling café. He was modestly dressed in a worn but clean jacket, his hands resting on a cup of coffee he had ordered to pass the time. The diner buzzed with energy, locals chatting over their meals and enjoying the day. Harry occasionally glanced toward the door, patiently waiting for his son, who was running late. He had no idea that the day ahead would bring trouble and humiliation. The door to the diner swung open, and two police officers, Officer George and Officer Gilbert, entered. Flashing their badges, they scanned the room for a free table. Their eyes quickly landed on Harry, who still sat alone in the corner. George leaned toward Gilbert and whispered something with a smirk, making both of them laugh. To them, Harry seemed out of place. The diner was in an affluent neighborhood, and people like Harry, especially elderly ones, were rarely seen here. They decided to intervene. Officer George took the lead and abruptly asked Harry what he was doing there. There was no greeting, no courtesy, just a rude, unwarranted demand for an explanation. Harry looked up from his coffee and calmly said he was waiting for someone. His voice was steady, revealing none of the discomfort he felt under their sharp gazes. Gilbert mockingly chimed in, saying it was unusual to see a poor old man trying to fit in with the wealthy crowd. He laughed as if it were a joke. Harry did not respond to the mockery. Instead, he remained composed and repeated that he was simply waiting for his son. But his calm demeanor seemed to irritate the officers even more. George was clearly unsatisfied with Harry's answer. He leaned in and demanded to see Harry's ID, not as a request but as an order. Harry complied and reached into his pocket. He pulled out his veteran ID and handed it over. He had carried it for many years. It was a symbol of his service and the sacrifices he had made for his country. When George looked at the card, he scoffed and dismissed it with a sneer, shouting that it was probably fake. He returned it with a flick of his hand, clearly unconcerned with the honor it represented. Gilbert agreed and remarked that it was hard to believe someone like Harry could have a veteran's ID, claiming that back in Harry's time, men like him only washed dishes or did manual labor. These words were a clear attempt to diminish Harry's achievements and reduce him to a stereotype. George laughed and nodded in agreement. By now, other customers had started to notice what was going on. Some looked around curiously, while others listened with concern, but no one spoke up. The lively chatter in the diner died down, and the atmosphere grew tense. Still, no one intervened. Despite the humiliation he faced, Harry remained composed. He had endured worse in his life and wasn't about to let these young men break his spirit. But the officers weren't done yet. George told Harry that if he didn't leave the diner, they would remove him by force. They didn't seem to be bluffing and looked ready to back up their words with action. Harry tried once more to explain that he was waiting for his son, but George cut him off sharply. He didn't want to hear it. To him, Harry was just a nuisance who didn't belong. The confrontation had reached its boiling point. The officers stood over Harry, waiting for him either to quietly leave or give them a reason to drag him out. But Harry didn't move. He looked at the officers with a steady gaze, his hands calmly resting on the table. Other patrons silently watched, waiting to see what would happen next. Harry understood he was being humiliated simply because of his modest clothing, but he also knew that reacting with anger would only give the officers what they wanted. So he remained silent, hoping his son would arrive soon and put an end to it all. As the seconds ticked by, the officers grew increasingly impatient. They were used to having their authority go unquestioned, and Harry's calm defiance and dignity unnerved them. George leaned in again and told Harry this was his last chance to leave the diner on his own. Harry didn't answer right away. He took a sip of his coffee, and when he finally spoke, he told the officers that he wasn't causing any trouble. He was simply a man waiting for his son. He had every right to be there, just like any other customer in the diner. George hadn't expected such a response, and for a brief moment, he hesitated. The other patrons remained silent, either too afraid or too indifferent to intervene, but the tension in the diner was unmistakable. Harry knew the situation was escalating, but he also knew he couldn't back down after everything he had endured in life. He had faced prejudice and aggression before, but this felt different. He had hoped that his service to his country might earn him some respect, but it seemed that to these young officers, his past meant nothing. So he continued sitting there, calm and dignified, even as the officers hovered over him, waiting for the slightest excuse to act. Suddenly, Officer George reached out and shoved the chair next to Harry, sending it crashing to the ground. The loud noise startled everyone in the diner, and all eyes turned toward the commotion. The old veteran stood up, but he remained composed. George stepped closer and, without warning, began patting Harry down roughly. Though he mumbled something about needing to make sure the old man wasn't hiding anything, his tone suggested he fully expected to find something suspicious. Harry raised his hands slightly, not in surrender but in compliance. After all, they were police officers. He'd been in situations like this before, where remaining calm was often the only thing that kept things from becoming deadly. Still, it was hard to ignore the anger bubbling inside him. Harry was a soldier, a man who had seen more battles and survived more than these young officers could imagine. And yet, in his own country, he was being treated like a criminal. Meanwhile, Officer Gilbert picked up Harry's veteran hat from the table. It was a simple cap, worn and faded with time. But to Harry, it was a symbol of pride. Gilbert looked at it with disdain, then tossed it to the ground like trash. For the first time, anger flashed across Harry's face. But he said nothing. He was determined not to give them the satisfaction of seeing him lose control. The patrons gasped and some stood up in shock, but no one stepped in, as the two officers clearly weren't joking. They were known around the area as bullies. Even though Harry hadn't done anything dangerous, George grabbed his arm and twisted it behind his back, causing the elderly man to grimace in pain. The officers laughed at Harry's pain and joked that he wasn't as tough as he thought he was. Harry clenched his teeth but didn't cry out. He had endured far worse pain in his life, both physical and emotional, but what hurt most was the blatant disrespect he was being shown after all he had sacrificed for his country. "You're going too far," Harry finally said. "You haven't seen half the horrors I've faced," the old man added. The veteran was merely trying to make the officers understand that he deserved better treatment, but they took it as a challenge. "How dare you? You think you can tell us how to do our job? We'll show you who holds the power. Tonight, you'll sleep in a cell for disrespecting the police. Let's see who comes to save trash like you," George sneered. Without wasting time, he pulled out a pair of handcuffs and snapped them onto Harry's wrist. But they didn't stop there. Gilbert picked up the old man's cane and began examining it. It was a sturdy, well-used cane that Harry had relied on for many years. Without a second thought, Gilbert did something unexpected. He snapped it in half over his knee and tossed the pieces aside. He turned to Harry and said he wouldn't need it anymore, since he'd be in a jail cell soon. The officers began dragging the veteran toward the door. But before they could leave, Harry managed to speak. He gestured with his chin toward a small card still lying on the table. Harry's calm defiance annoyed George, but he was curious. He grabbed the card, fully expecting it to be something trivial. But the moment he looked at it, his face went pale. Bold letters on the card read the name Commissioner Williams. The realization hit George like a punch to the gut. The man they had harassed, humiliated, and physically assaulted was the father of their boss, the police commissioner. All the arrogance drained from George's face as he grasped the severity of what they had done. This wasn't just a mistake, it was a career-ending disaster. He let go of the old man and began to mutter apologies. He tried to explain that they hadn't known who Harry was, as if that somehow excused their behavior. But Harry didn't respond. He simply stood there, waiting to see what would happen next. Officer Gilbert was visibly shaken as well. The overwhelming confidence that had driven their actions vanished, replaced by the cold reality of the consequences they were now sure to face. Other patrons, who had been too afraid to intervene earlier, now watched with a sense of relief and anticipation. Some even took out their phones to record the unfolding scene, sensing that it would not end well for the officers. But Harry remained calm. He knew the officers would remember this day for the rest of their lives. Then the door to the diner burst open, and in walked Commissioner Robert Williams. A tall man with a commanding presence, he immediately drew everyone's attention. The moment he entered, the entire diner seemed to hold its breath. Commissioner Williams quickly scanned the room to assess the situation. He saw his father Harry quietly seated at the table, while the two officers stood nearby, clearly unsettled. Without a second's hesitation, the commissioner walked over. He turned first to his father, and his heart broke at what he saw. He saw the stains on Harry's clothes, the broken cane lying on the floor, and the handcuffs still clasped around his wrists. Despite everything, the old man looked only at his son with pride. His expression remained calm and unshaken. Then the commissioner turned to the two officers. He didn't raise his voice. He simply asked them what they thought they were doing. George and Gilbert, who had been so confident just moments earlier, now stammered, their faces pale. They tried to explain, but their words were jumbled. They said they didn't know who Harry was and had no idea he was the commissioner's father. Their apologies were weak and full of excuses, but Commissioner Williams wasn't interested in their justifications. He looked at the two officers sternly and told them that it didn't matter who his father was. Every person deserves respect, regardless of their background or identity. Harry was not only a citizen but a veteran who had served his country with honor. To treat anyone, especially a veteran, in such a disgraceful manner was unacceptable. George and Gilbert listened to the commissioner's words, fully aware of the gravity of their mistake. They could feel the eyes of the entire diner upon them, and the shame of what they had done was written clearly on their faces. Commissioner Williams didn't need to say anything more. His message was clear. Without further delay, he ordered the two officers to leave the diner immediately. George and Gilbert lowered their heads in shame and left in silence. After the officers were gone, the commissioner apologized for being late and, more importantly, for how his officers had treated his father. He knew that no apology could undo the harm that had been done, but he wanted his father to know that he would do everything in his power to make it right. However, Harry didn't need an apology. He looked at his son with pride in his eyes and told him he was proud of how he had handled the situation. His son had shown compassion in a difficult moment, and that, above all, mattered most. Dear viewers, how would you punish those officers? Please share your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. Goodbye.